So Trev, it's Georgia Tech time, man. This is a big game for Notre Dame, and we're going to kind of break this show into 3 segments. And segment 1, we're going to kind of talk big picture, what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game? What does Notre Dame have to prove in this game? And we're going to talk about that. And then segment 2, we're going to look at the Notre Dame offense against the Georgia Tech defense, and really what does the offense have to prove? What is the matchup going to be like? What makes Georgia Tech such a scrappy, improved defense this season? And they are absolutely a scrappy and improved defense this season. Even the Louisville game, Trevor, when you look at it, they give up 31 points in that game, but Louisville had, I think, 2 non-offensive touchdowns in that game. You had a blocked field goal, and then obviously the broken up pass that was a backwards pass that ended up getting recovered in the end zone. So they did give up a lot of points there. They gave up a lot of points this past weekend in North Carolina. But, I mean, the one thing North Carolina can do, Trevor, is they can score. The problem is they can't stop anyone else from scoring. That's been kind of the problem with North Carolina. They have now scored 31 points in the game, or 34 points in the game, and lost. They scored 50 points in the game and lost by 20. So it was quite a battle between those 2 teams this past weekend. And then, of course, one of North Carolina's touchdowns in that game, Trevor, was on special teams, not on defense. So their defense has yet to give up over 30 points in a game this season, Trevor, for a team that gave up 29.5 per game last season. So Tyler Santucci's done a great job. We'll talk about how that matchup was going to look against Notre Dame. And then we'll dive into the third part of the show, Trevor, is really the matchup of, I would say, good on good in this particular game, which is the Notre Dame the Notre Dame defense against the Georgia Tech offense. And we'll talk about that. As far as we know, they have not reported yet on the actual status for Haynes King. And I doubt that they're going to, if he isn't going to play this weekend, I doubt that they're going to say that he's not going to play. They're going to want Notre Dame thinking about that. And so when we break this thing down, we'll talk about what they're going to be like if Haynes King plays and what that could mean for Notre Dame. So just that's kind of the overview of what we're going to do, Trev. But big picture first. I know this isn't a game that a lot of people have circled as like a quote-unquote big game from the standpoint of it's a name opponent. It's not like what people thought A&M was going to be and Florida State was going to be and USC. But this is a big game for Notre Dame. This is a much improved North Carolina football team, and it's going to be a huge test for Notre Dame.
I'm excited to jump into the show today and talk through the threats that Georgia Tech does pose. Notre Dame has a big game down in Atlanta this week, and a lot of people get caught up in, they're not ranked. They're 5-2. They already have 2 losses. It's a really good 5-2 football team, and one that does pose an interesting challenge to Notre Dame. Stuff that I all know that we're going to dive into throughout the show. But this is a big matchup, especially when you kind of weigh, like I said last week, we're starting to get into that territory of what is Notre Dame going to start to look like for the postseason, and what is this team going to start coming together with? And Notre Dame is starting to gain some momentum offensively. Georgia Tech has a gritty and tough and aggressive defense. So there's a lot to dive into today, man. I'm excited.
When you talk about what's at stake in this game, Trevor, there's a lot of big picture aspects at stake that even go beyond Georgia Tech. And we'll kind of start with those a little bit. And when you look at this Notre Dame football team, they are winners of 4 straight. So they need to prove that they can roll. And 3 of those 4 have come by double digits. Their win margins are 59, 25, 42, and then 7. The game in which they won by 7, they held a double-digit lead for over half the game. They held at least a 10 to 14 point lead over Louisville for over half the game. And so they've been somewhat convincing victories, even though they haven't always been, wow, what a performance, right? I mean, Purdue was a great performance. Stanford was a great performance. I think Louisville was a very good performance because that's a really good football team. Miami of Ohio, not a great performance, but you did what you needed to do. You beat a team by 25 points. This is a chance, first and foremost, Trevor, to go out there and win your 5th straight game. That may not seem like that big of a deal, but for Marcus Freeman, I think it absolutely is a big deal because, number one, it would tie his longest winning streak of his career, which is 5 games that happened from October 22nd to November 19th in 2022, where Notre Dame won 5 games that season, beat UNLV, beat Syracuse, beat Clemson, beat Navy, and beat Boston College. what I would say about this 5-game stretch is I do think it's better competition, especially if you're able to beat Georgia Tech, because Georgia Tech's a good football team. Louisville's a good football team. Clemson was really good in 2022. Syracuse is really good, but those other teams were not good at all. And so it's a chance, number one, for Notre Dame to prove that, hey, listen, because this is what we still don't know, and we won't even know this weekend, but it's just another step is, can Marcus Freeman be the type of head coach that gets his team ready to play consistently? I mean, from year one of his tenure, from his 4th game, I mean, we saw it in his 4th and 5th game of his entire career. You start off really bad. You lose to Ohio State. You lose to Marshall. You struggle to beat Cal, and then you blast a 9-win North Carolina team that played for the ACC title that year and barely lost to Oregon. I mean, lost to Dan Lanning's Oregon team by a point in the bowl game.
Yeah.
You go out and then really convincingly beat a quality BYU team. It was an 8-point game, but it wasn't really that close. And you're thinking, okay, now they're going to live up to that preseason top 5 ranking. And then you go out and you lose to Stanford. And then you rebound with a blowout win over UNLV. You have a blowout win over Syracuse. You have a blowout win over Clemson. You're blowing Navy out at halftime, and then you let them back in the game, and you blow Boston College out, and you're thinking, okay, this team has arrived. All right, you went on the road and lost to a good USC team. Yeah, you were banged up. That was probably a better win. Got a great bowl win. 2023, now we're going to really see what Notre Dame is capable of. And they went out, and they had a 4-game winning streak to start the season and won by 39, 53, 21, 24, and then you lose to Ohio State. You barely scrape by and beat Duke. You then get beaten, embarrassed by Louisville. And then you think they righted the ship, Trevor, blew out USC, blew out Pitt. They're playing a Clemson team that is struggling, had 8 starters out. Of course, Notre Dame is going to really start rolling now. And then they didn't. So we've seen stretches where Notre Dame has done what they've done over the last month. We've seen stretches where Notre Dame can play dominant football for a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then just that letdown game. This is an opportunity with a really good opponent to show that, hey, we're not that team anymore. We're a different team. We're a team that's going to be locked in and focused and really build on the momentum that you have over the last 3 weeks. We had Louisville, had a bye week, and then pounded Stanford. That's the first thing, Trevor. It's not even about the playoff and this other stuff we're going to talk about. It's that right there. You have an opportunity to go out there and prove to yourself and prove to the nation that Notre Dame is not this up and down team that they've been the last 3 years. They have arrived as a team that just every week, you better bring it or you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
One thing that this week is going to tell me too, in addition to what you just said, is how well is Marcus Freeman going to have his team prepared to run and roll on Saturday, right? So we talked about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. They're 4-0 off of the bye week in Marcus Freeman's tenure, which is fantastic. There's that, that narrative that a lot of teams come out slow and sleepy through the bye week. The issue for Marcus Freeman has been the game after the game from the bye week. So you go back and you look at 2022, they have a bye week and then they beat a ranked BYU team. The week after that, when they only have 1 week to prepare, they drop a game to Stanford, a game that they should have won. In 2023, they had a bye week and they come out and they roll a Pitt team. And then the week after that, they lose to a Clemson team that was down 8 starters. And then they had a second bye week that year where after the bye, they come out and they roll a Wake Forest team. And then, yes, the final score does not really dictate at one point how close that Stanford game was. But I believe at one point, Stanford had a 16-14 lead in that ball game. So
late in the second quarter.
Yep.
Like last few minutes, second quarter, Notre Dame put 2 touchdowns or 2 scores on the board late in that half to pull away. Yes.
And I think Notre Dame had 3 offensive turnovers in the first half against Stanford. I think it was 2 interceptions and 1 fumble or 1 interception, a Sam Hartman fumble, and then I think a fumble on special teams, something like that. So what all of that tells me is from the bye week, Marcus Freeman does a really good job of getting his team prepared and ready to roll that following Saturday. The week after that, when you have a smaller window to get your team prepared, that's when it becomes lackadaisical. That's when it becomes less focused and not as aggressive and not as fundamentally sound. So there's going to be a lot of things at Notre Dame that I'm going to be watching for on Saturday to make sure that some of that narrative gets put to rest. Now, some of it could be coincidence, but I think the numbers and the games and the stats kind of tell us otherwise. So I think that this is going to be big picture, a really good opportunity for Marcus Freeman to come back out and kind of put that narrative to rest and tie his longest winning streak at the helm at Notre Dame.
because who you've been does not determine who you're going to be. It doesn't have to determine who you're going to be.
Right.
Right. And Marcus Freeman has one of these mantras, and he's got several. One of them is, hey, listen, challenge everything, right? Challenge everything. Well, look, the way you've done things in the past has led to you being a very inconsistent football team. It's led to you looking great one week and then not the next. It's led to you maybe overlooking some teams you shouldn't be overlooking, right? And that's what I kind of think about with Georgia Tech is like, I hope you're not overlooking this football team because this is a good football team at 5-2. The good news is Notre Dame did get it. The players did watch that Louisville game. They did watch how Georgia Tech competed with Louisville. They know how scrappy Louisville was, so hopefully they won't. And that will be in an NFL stadium, so hopefully there's enough of those things to keep this team focused because this is not a Georgia Tech team you're going to be able to show up and just roll the ball out and dominate because you're way more talented than them like you did Stanford and Purdue. This is not a Georgia Tech. This Georgia Tech team is not one that you can just go out on Saturday and just, all right, we're not going to play a lot of fire, not going to play a lot of intensity. We're just going to kind of go through the motions, and we're just more talented like they did against Miami of Ohio. You're going to have to be at your best. And not only to beat them, but to beat them the way that you need to beat them, Trevor. And this kind of leads into my second point about what's at stake. So that's sort of the macro look at it, right? Like the big picture, what are they going to prove? There's also a really important aspect to this game in 2024. And I was talking with Bill Bender about this earlier today in the show we did at CFB Nation. So I co-hosted that today because Bill Trocchi's out of town. So I took care of that. We'll get that up here later today. But the conversation that we had and that you and I have had as well, I believe off the air, I've talked with so many different people about this team, but it's not just about winning anymore for Notre Dame. I mean, you've got to look good doing it, right? And I was making the point with him about Georgia. There was this assumption that Georgia was going to go, if they went 9-3, and let's say they lost to, Bama, Ole Miss, and Texas, they were going to be 9-3, blew out a lot of teams, beat Clemson, beat Tennessee, and they blew everybody out. But my point was, when you look at this Georgia team, they're ranked 5th because of preseason hype. They've not looked like a top 5 team. Yeah, they beat Clemson in week 1. Clemson played like crap that game. They barely beat Kentucky. They struggled to put Auburn away. They struggled with a really bad Mississippi State team. Only beat them by 10. Toledo had a more convincing win at Mississippi State than Georgia had against Mississippi State, I believe, at home. I believe that game was in Athens, correct? So you get to the point where you look and say, I don't know that Georgia's that dominant of a football team right now. And those are things that are going to start getting compared once the committee starts ranking. Now, the voters in the AP and the coaches poll, they're still hyping Georgia up because of the preseason, and that's fine. And because they won a title a few years ago, right? But like for how they've looked this season, they have not looked good. This is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and get a convincing win just in general, which they did last weekend. So while Georgia's struggling with Mississippi State, Notre Dame is wrecking Stanford. While Alabama's struggling with South Carolina, Notre Dame is wrecking Stanford. Well, now you get another opportunity, Trevor, to go out there and say, hey, listen, we're going to play a good 5-2 team, and we're going to handle our business. That's the objective. That's the goal. Doesn't mean it's going to happen because this is a good Georgia Tech team, as we've mentioned. But this game's going to be on ESPN. You're an 11-point favorite on the road, essentially. You've got to look like a top 10 team in this game. Here's the other part, Trevor. There are 2 teams that Notre Dame could potentially be in contention for a playoff spot or most likely seeding. So if Notre Dame goes 11-1, they're in the playoff, right? If they lose this weekend, then we'll stop talking about the playoff refer and until there's a reason to talk about it again. But if you keep winning, you're in. Then the debate now becomes, okay, where are you going to be seated? 5, 6, 7, 8 to be a home team, or are you going to be 9 or lower, and then you're playing on the road? Right now, a lot of the projections have them as a traveling that first weekend. I think the only one I've seen that has them hosting a game was Bud Elliott from, I don't know who he works for. He's one of those podcasts, I think maybe On 3. But he has Notre Dame as a 7 seed hosting Bama, which would be very interesting. But 2 of the teams that you may be in contention with are Miami and Georgia. Well, what do you have in common with those 2 teams? You all play Georgia Tech. And when you look at the schedule, the other interesting aspect of it is Georgia Tech plays Notre Dame essentially at home. They play in a neutral field. They play Miami at home and Georgia on the road. So when you're sitting there saying, okay, well, Notre Dame's got a comparable resume to Miami, who maybe went 11-2 or 12-1 and lost the ACC title game, or they're going against Georgia, who's maybe a 10-2 team, and you're looking at their schedule and you're saying, okay, well, we got to find some things to separate these teams. Well, Notre Dame played them on the neutral field and beat them with a last-second field goal. Miami and Georgia stomped them. Okay, that could be one of those factors. Or you look at it and say, okay, well, listen, Notre Dame pounded Georgia Tech. Pounded Georgia Tech. And then 2 weeks later, Georgia Tech went out and, 2 games later, 3 weeks later, Georgia Tech goes out there and gives Miami everything they can handle and took Georgia down to the wire. Okay, those things could then start to factor into it. So I hate to say it because it should just be about winning and losing and all those type of things. But it comes down to the point where style points could start being differences between, are you a 5 seed? Are you a 6 seed? Are you a 7 seed? Are you an 8 seed? And Notre Dame just going out there and smacking people week after week after week is going to be a big part of that. So you have a chance to beat a really good Georgia Tech team this weekend, hopefully beat a ranked Navy team the next weekend, and that's your last 2 games before that first top 25 college football playoff ranking comes out. That's the other thing that Notre Dame is playing for this weekend on top of that, Trevor. On top of building momentum and building themselves, that's the reality that they're in. Notre Dame can pretend that they're ignoring it, but they better not, because these things are going to factor into where you're viewed by the playoff committee.
Just one of those things that you don't want to leave up to interpretation, Brian, right? Because there will be – now, we follow the game and the schedule pretty closely, but at the end of the day, like a committee of voters will kind of look at Notre Dame's schedule, especially in comparison to what some of the other interconference schedules are. It's like, well, they played some good teams, but – then you have the Alabamas who have played Georgia and who played Tennessee and, LSU. So you just don't want to leave anything up to interpretation if you're Notre Dame, right? One of the reasons why people are very high on IU, who in the grand scheme of things has not played a tough schedule up to this point, is because they've decimated every single team that they've played. So if you're Notre Dame and thinking forward, some of it does come down to that eye test. You don't want to say, well, yeah, sure, they beat a 5-2 Georgia Tech team. It's like, yeah, they beat them by 30. They beat them by 20. Navy was ranked and they were looking really good, but questions around their strength of schedule. Agreed, Notre Dame beat them by 35. Like, you don't want to leave anything up to interpretation of. Now, look, ideally, does Notre Dame beat every opponent like that? Yeah, but that might not be reality, unfortunately, right? But you just need to put yourself in a point where when a committee of voters is looking at Notre Dame's schedule, and if their strength of schedule is going to be a question, you have to prove on paper that they can go back and just look at that game and say, yeah, sure, they didn't play that strong of an opponent, but it was never that close. It was never in question if Notre Dame was going to win. It can't be one of those, 21-19 Ball State games from back in 2018 and, things like that. You have to start really increasing your margin of victory, keep putting together that offense, because Brian, to your point, that is the grand scheme of the impact on the season. Because if Notre Dame can go put away a Georgia Tech team that is essentially a home game, yes, it's not on Georgia Tech's campus field, but
which they chose, by the way.
Yep.
They chose to give that up. This is a home game for Georgia Tech. It's on a neutral field, but this is a home game for Georgia Tech.
Right.
Just want to make sure people understand that.
So you have the opportunity now that if a Georgia Tech team goes out and plays a Miami team really hard and, they find a way to beat Miami or find a way to knock off Georgia and Athens, you look at that game and then you go back and look, well, Notre Dame beat them by 2 scores on a neutral field. So that is what is at stake at this game, Brian. Can't emphasize that enough.
If you're a Notre Dame fan and we're doing all these, you ever see that meme of what's that guy's name? It's Charlie something. He was in Horrible Bosses, and he was in that Philadelphia show with Charlie Day. Mm-hmm. That meme where he's like connecting all these crazy dots, and I don't know what that's from. Yeah. But that's like us talking about who you're rooting for in each week to get Notre Dame in the college football playoff and a high seed and all this kind of stuff. But if you're looking at it, handle your business this weekend. Beat Georgia Tech the way you're supposed to. Now, to me, that doesn't necessarily mean 40-point win, That could be a 10-point win, a 14-point win, a 17-point win. At the end of the day, winning matters. Winning and win out and you're in the playoff, right? We're talking about this is about seeding. Seeding then could have a big say in who are you playing in round 1 or 2. Like somebody said today, well, without Benjamin Morrison, there's no way Notre Dame's going to win a playoff game. And, I said, well, I mean, who are they playing? Answer that question for me. Because like you say, well, man, Benjamin Morrison. Yeah, well, 2 of the 4 teams you're going to play in the last 6 games without Benjamin Morrison are option teams. Okay. I mean, you can survive without Benjamin Morrison playing an option team. And he didn't even start, I don't think, against Navy in 2022. Remember? They didn't even start him in that game. And then, the team like Georgia Tech is going to be dangerous, and obviously, but then, one of the other teams you're going to play is kind of terrible. So it's listen, you're still pretty good there. Now, can you make runs in the playoff? Well, that depends on who you're playing. The higher seed you get, probably the lower ranked team you're going to play, but then the higher chances you have of playing the ACC or Big 12 champ in the second round. That's why this stuff matters. So if you're a Notre Dame fan kind of following me on all this crazy drawing links and with stuff that matters, and the reason I bring this up about style points and all that other kind of stuff is because we've heard the committee talk about this before, Trevor. We've heard it talk about common opponents and look, this team struggled with that team and this other team handled them, and that's one of the things that kind of differentiated where we ranked a certain team, right? Well, you look at Notre Dame and you say, okay, what do you need to do? Notre Dame, handle your business this weekend. Well, then you want now you become a big Georgia Tech fan, because now Georgia Tech next week goes on the road and plays Virginia Tech. You want them to win that game and get their momentum back. Then they have a bye week, and then they play Miami at home, NC State at home, and at Georgia. If you can beat Miami, just doable, which they beat them last year in Miami. This is a better Miami team than it was last year, certainly, but it's a better Georgia Tech team than it was last year. And then just give Georgia a game. Like those are the things that can really help Notre Dame go from 7 seed to 6 seed or 5 seed, or those type of things. And it's not just this game; it's also other things. So, those are all parts of it. So, when you talk about what's at stake, Trevor, it's all of that stuff. But I also think the final piece is this is still a football team that is building its confidence. We started to see it take a jump against Louisville. It took a big jump against Stanford, but was Stanford the cementing that confidence point in your season? I don't know that it was. I think a game like this could be. You're going on the road. You're playing in an NFL stadium. You're playing a really quality football team. This could be the game that if you play the way that you're supposed to and to play the way you're capable of, could be that cementing moment for this Notre Dame team to say, hey, you know what? We are really good. And I know we lost this guy and we lost that guy and we lost that guy and we hate that we don't have our brothers with us, but we're still really good and we can handle business on both sides of the ball. I think that's the final piece for me, Trevor, is this is the kind of game that could serve as that cementing it in their heads that, hey, we're really good. And when we prepare a certain way, we're really hard to beat. So you know what? I like this feeling. Let's keep preparing this way. And that's how teams like that become juggernauts, because it finally gets in their head. Oh, so this is what we have to do to be dominant, not show up on Saturday, but put in that work and have that focus during the week. Yeah, we go out and handle business. Yeah, we are that kind of team. We are that good. Coach isn't just saying that because he has to. We are that good.
I think you said it perfectly from a preparation standpoint, right? Because there are times where it feels like Notre Dame is just kind of, I don't want to say throwing stuff against the wall and hope that it sticks, but it almost feels like from what we hear in press conferences and how the team shows up and what the product is on the field on Saturday, it almost feels like the preparation almost changes week to week. And it's like, all right, we think this is going to work. It worked against this team. I like this, but not necessarily this. This game from a preparation standpoint has the chance to really solidify, okay, every week, Monday through Friday, Sunday to Friday, whatever you want to say it, or even Sunday up until Saturday when they're doing the player walk, this is how we have to prepare at a championship level. And you start getting in that groove. I agree with you that the Stanford game, I don't think it cemented them as, this is where we're at now. But it's a huge step forward in where it was, because especially on the offensive side, it was the most complete, balanced game that we've seen from Notre Dame's offense so far this season. And if you can do it against a Georgia Tech defense, which I know we're going to dive into here in a little bit, it will start to get that ball rolling of like, okay, we can do this. This is something, these are the things that we need to continue to do on a week to week basis. And we're doing that the rest of the season. Not saying that if eventually something doesn't work or the style of opponent that you're playing, you do the same thing every week. But from a mental preparation standpoint, there are going to be things that they take away if they go out and convincingly beat a Georgia Tech team that Marcus Freeman and Denbrock and Golden can walk away from and say, okay, this is now a part of our weekly preparation that was not really a constant. So I'm excited to see what that's going to look like for them on Saturday, because on paper, this is a team that Notre Dame should perform really well against, but Georgia Tech poses a lot of threats. So from a preparation standpoint, going to be really interesting to see what takeaways that we have and what we see on Saturday.
So, Trev, we're going to get into the offense next, but before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And the reason we ask you to do those things is not just because we want to, we feel great when we get X number of likes. It really does help the algorithm. It helps this show get spread. It helps people they see a show, hey, this is a well-liked show. People hit the like, people share it, people do all those type of things. And all of a sudden they start promoting it to more and more people who look for Notre Dame content. So that's one of those ways. It's a free thing that takes you 5 seconds to do, and it helps us. And, that's much appreciated, folks. And of course, people ask all the time, how can I best support you? And as we found out with our guy, Larry Wise, and his family that hooked him up with his membership, Larry Wind, excuse me, the membership that his family hooked him up with, that's always the best way to support Irish Breakdown, is that way. So we appreciate that very, very much. So check that out. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also a reminder, I got an email from someone yesterday that says, hey, I keep going to my saved, I've got your bookmarked, I got your page bookmarked, and they keep sending me to this old Athlon page. Some people are still going to the old SI page. And then I'm just like, look, always type in your bookmark www.irishbreakdown.com, because no matter where we go, whether Athlon gives us a new page, whether we go independent, whether we're with SI, no matter who we're with, irishbreakdown.com always links you back to that homepage, wherever it is, irishbreakdown.com. So that's what you should have in your bookmark if you want to have that as well. So when you talk about getting our content, supporting our content, those are all the best ways to do that, and we appreciate all of it.